Hello, 732 students. Well, first off, congratulations. You survived your first online module. I have a few notes I took. I'm writing them down here on my notebook, so I have my cue cards for me. Um, but I think you did a great job this week. I really appreciated reading all of your discussion questions. I really enjoyed learning a little bit about you in the introduction section, about what your research interests are, and about your general anxiety level regarding this course. Given my past experience teaching this class, I'd say where you're at is fairly typical. As I said in the intro, this is a lot like learning a new language, so it's not going to be easy, but I think you guys are in a very similar space as other students who have done quite well, so you're going to do just fine. A couple things that stuck out for me in the discussion. Now, as I said before, generally those discussions, I'm going to let them work themselves out. That's part of your class participation, is answering each other's questions, but I will chime in if there's something that I think is very important to be emphasized, or if there's some question that I don't think is being answered adequately. So that's my general rule for when I weigh in, but I do read them all, so rest assured when you're writing stuff down there, it's getting read. Okay, so a couple things that stood out. The first was this discussion of spurious relationships. And I realize the language there can be a little confusing. Spurious versus non-spurious. What are you talking about? But basically, we're talking about the difference between a correlation between two variables and causation. And the reason that is so important is that sometimes if there's a correlation between two variables, I mean, an example recently in kind of popular culture and just in our society was vaccines and autism. Right? There's maybe a correlation that has to deal with the years that people generally show symptoms of autism, that they correlate with when vaccines are given. And you could see that a lot of people made some decisions regarding, after that relationship, which was spurious. I mean, that was not a real relationship. It was not a causal relationship that was ever identified in any credible research. But because there was that correlation, that spurious relationship, it could result in bad policy, bad decision making, etc. So spuriousness, all that refers to is when there is a correlation between two variables, but the one variable is not actually causing change in the other variable. The example I gave on the message boards, which was extremely silly, but was if I was to get up every day, walk across the street, not get hit by a car for 30 days, I might decide that, the thing that's making me not get hit by a car is the fact that I'm looking both ways. Or that I'm not looking both ways, excuse me. So, that would eventually get into trouble, right? Because the reason I'm not getting hit by a car is pure chance. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm not looking both ways. That relationship is spurious. And the reason this is so important is that when we start getting more into the SPSS part of this class and digging into the statistical side of things, we are constantly trying to control for variables. You may have heard this terminology before, but controlling for variables means just taking other factors into account. So an example, I do education research sometimes, where I might look at student test scores. And one of the things that I always have to control for is previous year's student test scores. Because if I'm trying to find out the actual influence a school, a program, a teacher is having on student learning, I have to take into account where that student came in. I'm controlling for that student's past performance, so I can try to isolate what exactly that causal mechanism is. And if this is still a little bit confusing to you, I think it will make more sense when we start applying these ideas in quantitative modeling and actual statistical analysis. And if that sounds scary, that's good. It is a little scary, but we'll get to it. It'll be useful. On that note, the other thing that really stuck out to me, and I got to take my hat off. I have no hat. I don't have any hair either, but that's not the point. I'll take my hat off to Rebecca because you definitely cracked me up on your message board post that I know nothing. Okay, another post out there asked about the relevance of this, and does this really matter? And I'd argue that yes. Now, I'm horribly biased. I teach this stuff, so if it doesn't matter, then I guess I don't really have a job anymore. So yes, it has to matter for me. But no, there are reasons that it does matter, why data-driven decision-making does matter. Because think of it this way. If you're not using data to drive your decision-making, if you're not using data to determine how resources get allocated, how people get promoted, how HR decisions get made, what exactly are you using? How exactly are decisions getting made? What are the basis of agency or government decision making? Maybe it's relationships. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. We talk about PA being about professionalization, about being a meritocracy, about about concepts such as equity and fairness. Well, if discussions, let's say a contract is being given out, if a contract is being given out based on the basis of a relationship, rather than the basis of data showing that this is the best proposal or this is the group that has the best cost benefit analysis that comes out of it, then you're operating in the opposite, in a sphere where you're pursuing the opposite of efficiency. So inefficiency goes against the whole spirit of PA. If it's not relationships and you're not using data, maybe it's just inertia. So you're doing something because you always did something. Well, that's a good way for a government or a nonprofit to stagnate, not have positive progress. What if it's not inertia? Maybe it's just a hunch. Well, that's great, right? But there's nothing scientific about that. Hunches can be wrong. Maybe you're just muddling through. You probably read Charles Lindblom in the intro class, or at the very least were exposed to it, and his theory of muddling through. And he argued that oftentimes that's what government does. We just make it up as we go along. Solve one problem, the immediate problem at today, and worry about tomorrow. And why I think that may be accurate in many circumstances. It's certainly not ideal to have an effective, equitable, efficient, and economical government. So what does data do? Well, data allows you to combat all of those things. And I referenced this in the post about, in your own personal careers, how it can help make you the smartest person in the room. And I didn't mean that to sound, snarky. What I meant by that is that you might be in a situation where you don't have the relationships. Maybe somebody else has a different hunch or a different instinct. Maybe someone just wants to do what we did last year. But if you can actually show credible data in support of your preferred action of a government decision, well, not only does that make you as an individual very valuable to an organization, not only does it make it more likely that your preferred policy preference, in this case the right policy preference, gets done, but it also helps legitimize government or agency decision making. Why? Because there's actually real evidence and data behind it. And as a corollary, it's something that funders tend to like as well. And oftentimes grant proposals will come with a requirement that you have some type of evaluation system in place. And being comfortable with data allows you to create those. All right, another thing that came up was subjectivity bias. And this is something we all face. It comes through the territory of public service motivation. Chances are you got into your chosen field because you were passionate about it. You probably have certain preferences. You want to show that your program's working, that the thing you care about is the best thing, the thing that should be funded, the thing that should attract resources. And I understand this when you're doing research. I mean, I understand this. It's hard to get rid of this human element because we are an applied social science. We are a practical field. We are not just solving problems abstractly in a lab. We are solving problems where the lab is not only our careers, our communities, but the people and things we care about. So how do we combat this? Well, that's why we spent so much time in the introduction and why we'll spend so much time working with statistics. We combat this by being perfectly transparent in our actions, our methods. Why are we studying the thing we're studying? Why is this an appropriate place to begin this research? Right now you're conducting a literature review, and the literature review is going to serve as a bridge to your project. You're going to review everything, all the key concepts and all the key information that came before that justify you doing the project you want to do and explaining why that project's going to add on to what came before. So you're pushing knowledge forward. When you actually write up your final paper, you're going to have to explain all of these things. Why did you make the decisions you made? What were the shortcomings of your research? What are the potential threats to the validity of your research? And all of this to say is you're never going to completely remove the possibility of subjective bias, because after all, we are human beings. But if you are fully transparent, you can demonstrate to the reader that whatever that bias that you think you might have, or maybe even subconsciously have and don't know about it, you can allow the consumer of that research to evaluate what you did, replicate it if possible, and be comfortable that you didn't do anything, take any actions that were a result of you having some sort of underlying bias. Now that's difficult too, especially when you do conduct a research project and you maybe do have a preferred outcome, you don't get that preferred outcome. It can be difficult, But you know what? That's a wake-up call often. I would argue that if you are going to really, buy into analytic-driven decision-making, that's a powerful thing. And that's a good management leadership skill, recognizing when, the thing that made sense to you, you thought was going to work, didn't work. Now we got to take an extra course of action. And that can be difficult because of the thing we call the sunk cost fallacy. You might have already put resources into a program, resources into an idea, and that can be a wake-up call, finding out why it didn't work. But important nonetheless. Okay, many of you brought up the struggles you were having in the readings with understanding the language of statistics, and all I can say to that is, yeah, that's going to happen. These are new terms. These are not terms that you use very often in kind of your real life. But it is the terminology of statistics. It's the terminology of research methods. It's consistent, and that's why the language is important, because the reason I just discussed about being fully transparent, addressing that subjectivity bias, it's important that we're all speaking the same language. We have any pilots out there? I think we have at least one pilot in the room. When you're working with air traffic control, right, there's two languages that often get used, French and English. And that's really not fair to the pilots that don't know English or French and have to learn it. But why do they do that? Because if it's going to be an effective relationship, it's kind of important in that regard, commercial airline pilot and tower, if you're going to have an effective outcome, you better be speaking the same language. So that's why the language is important, and the only way to really get comfortable with it is to keep using it. So when you come across things that you don't understand, look them up. Somebody mentioned, was it Alexa or Google Home or something? That's cool. If you need virtual reality help, that's great. Go for it. But the point is, stick with it. Stick with it. Don't let a few words that aren't familiar intimidate you, because you're smart people. You wouldn't be here in this MPA program. You wouldn't have gotten this far if you didn't have the capacity to do well in this class. So stick with it. All right, coding questions about SPSS. We're going to get to SPSS. Okay, our second class, half of it, so the second lecture will be lab. It'll just be lab work. It's work that you can do along with me in SPSS. It's practical, applied, and you will get comfortable with SPSS and have an opportunity to understand how that program works. And the best way to learn it is by doing. So I could sit here and explain to you all about SPSS, and I will do that, but we'll do it while we're actually working with the program. So some of those coding questions that came up, like 0 or 1, etc., we'll get to that. As I mentioned, the literature review is going to be due on, I have my syllabus here, it's going to be due February 19th. So if you do have questions about that, you know where to find me, but never lose sight of the point of that is to do a review of the literature that came before you that ties in to your chosen project. It should help give you ideas as well. Now, I will say that many of you not many of you, but many a student has come to me and said, no one's ever done anything on this. And I'm here to tell you that that's probably not true. There's stuff out there. Not everything is going to be directly on the topic that you're choosing, but there might be something that came before it. There's some type of relevance to it. And part of being able to comfortable conducting a good literature review is being able to sift through all of this large body of literature and find those smaller number of articles that are relevant. And the best way to do that is by doing. When you find a good article, something that has a lot of stuff that you care about, take a look at the citations on that one. Snowball it. Find things that this author who wrote this really relevant paper, what they were citing. So keep at it. Somebody asked me too about the final paper, and that's up on D2L, the assignment. It's been up on D2L the entire time if you want to work ahead. But I encourage you if you want to look at it, go for it. I will go over it in depth later this semester, because this is meant to be a building block. This, more than any other class I teach in this program, builds on the previous session. So the literature review is designed to set up the rest of your paper, and I fully expect you to use that literature review as part of your final paper. So look at that. You're already going to be a quarter of the way done with your final paper without even realizing you're working on your final paper. Okay, so with that, great job this first session. I think The conversation was great. If you do have questions in the meantime, I will continue to check those message boards from time to time, but I'll also set up the reading question message board. I'll do that right away, actually, because the reading is going to be due on February 19th as well, and that's chapters 5 through 10. So under Module 2 discussions, I will set that up right away so you can go ahead and ask any questions about the text you have in the meantime, and I will continue checking that. So good luck with the rest of your classes if you're taking other things, and I look forward to being in touch with you soon.